Last time the Clemson Tigers ventured up to Notre Dame Stadium, it was a pretty good outing for one DJ Uiagalelei, but in the end, Notre Dame pulled out an overtime win. We'll see what we got going this trip for the Tigers going to South Bend. We got Brian Driscoll on the line from Irish Breakdown. We always rely on Brian for the best in Notre Dame coverage. You should as well. It's Irish Breakdown. That's your destination. Brian, how you doing today?
Doing great. Busy, ready for another big game. Hopefully Notre Dame can keep winning, but yeah, it's doing well. It's November college football, Mark. It doesn't get any better than this.
No doubt about that. And I'm guessing that you would be okay with another pick six to start this game.
Yes. Yeah, if Jack Kaiser or J.D. Bertrand can take the ball from the running back like Jeremiah Usakorm and run it back for a touchdown, and then to make it even better on the very next series, strip the ball on third down from a receiver and set your offense up for another score. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that, certainly. Yeah.
We usually start with offense, but let's start with the defense. We're already there. Garrett Schrader ran for 2 yards. Now, I know that there was some sack yardage included, but that guy tears up just about everybody. Has been somebody that with Sean Tucker getting so much attention has been the focal point of the Syracuse offense. And Notre Dame, first and foremost, that was my takeaway, is that they took that away from the Orange.
Well, it was huge because that's something Notre Dame has not been very good at this year. I mean, I think they came into that game with 1 turnover the entire season, which is still just nutty. So I think the fact that not only did you go on the road against a good team, the crowd was really loud. It was a big game for them. I mean, this is a huge game for Syracuse. You not only quiet the crowd, but I think it gave them a little extra spark because it's something they haven't really done this season. And I think Garrett Schrader came into that game a little, I'll say rattled. That's not he was beat up against Clemson. He missed some time during the week of practice, and I think something like that just kind of sent him on a downward trajectory where he wasn't the same kid the rest of the game. Even if you just watch him try and tackle Brandon Joseph on that play, it's like he didn't know what happened, and I think that kind of thing. And I think it also gave Notre Dame a lot of confidence because Notre Dame's a reeling football team, Mark. I mean, they are. I mean, they're just trying to bounce back from a loss to Stanford and all that. I think they needed that confidence boost. And then after that, you started seeing Notre Dame play like the team that we all thought, well, at least I thought that they were going to be coming into the season.
Well, Brian, I'm sure you've gotten the memo by now. Now that Notre Dame has defeated Syracuse, well, Syracuse is no good. That's why Notre Dame beat them. That's how we play that game now with the rankings. Well, they can't be any good because
right.
So how do you and I will preface this by saying when I went through my top 25 rankings this week, I started to count up the 5-3 and 6-2 teams in college football. There are 42 of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot to weed through there. Notre Dame would have one of the more capable schedules out there amongst those 6-2, 5-3 teams. So how do we corroborate the team that beat North Carolina by 3 scores, who's turning out to be a pretty damn good football team? And obviously Drake May is a superstar. And then the Syracuse performance versus that Stanford pitfall in the middle.
And that's the thing with Notre Dame. We were talking earlier on our show, Mark, and I've said I would contend that Notre Dame's 2 best games this year, North Carolina and Syracuse, they were more impressive than Clemson has been in any single game they've played this year. The problem is Clemson's just been a really steady football team all year. They're not the dominant 2018 team or the 2016 or 2015 team. They're just a steadily good football team. Notre Dame has been 1 week they go to toe-to-toe with Ohio State. The next week they're losing to Marshall. They barely beat a mediocre Cal team at home. The next week go smash North Carolina on the road. Beat BYU more convincingly than the final score showed. Then you come home and you lose to a bad Stanford team. And then you go on the road and beat a pretty good Syracuse team. I can't figure this team out. And I think that's been the frustrating thing is because, you look at the rankings that come out last night and, I'm going through the rankings and I'm putting all the numbers together to give my opinion. And, there's 4 teams in the top 25 that have 2 wins over other ranked opponents based on who's ranked now. It's Tennessee has 2, Clemson has 3, TCU has 2, and Utah has 2. Notre Dame also has 2. And I think that's the frustrating thing is how do you do that? And then one of your losses is a game to the number 2 team that you led for 33 minutes of that game, and then yet you lost at home to Marshall and Stanford. And I think that's been the maddening thing about Notre Dame, and what makes them hard to predict is if they play their game, they absolutely can beat Clemson this weekend. But if they play like they have at home every other game this year, Clemson will smack them. And that's just the great unknown about this football team. I kind of know who Clemson's going to be on Saturday because they've just been that team every week. And that's, it's a credit to that staff. Notre Dame, you just no clue what you're going to get from week to week.
Brian, we don't have you on here to throw up your hands and say, I don't know what to make of this team. You're supposed to have the answers.
I've been trying to figure it out, but I do think, however, the last couple games, we're starting to see a version of Notre Dame that we hadn't seen in a while. And it's not so much an execution thing, because a lot of the stuff that we saw against Syracuse is stuff that's hurt them all year. Your red zone defense is literally yet to make a stop all year. You have a turnover on offense. You're still giving up too many big plays and all the stuff. You're not throwing the football. The reason you're able to still beat Syracuse convincingly is because we finally saw Notre Dame start to exert their will on their opponent physically in a way that we haven't really seen as much all year. They didn't bully a Stanford team that was waiting to be bullied, that like we saw UCLA do to them. They were a team that did not play with a great deal of confidence. What I think has happened is, after Syracuse, talking to several sources, Marcus Freeman had a sit down with his coordinators, and it was like, look, these kids are thinking too much. We're putting too much on their plates. I've talked to sources that have said the play sheets for the offense and defense this year are significantly bigger than they were last year. And I think Coach Freeman stepped in and said, it's going to be less of that and more of, let's let these kids go play confidently and play fast. And you started to see a little bit of that against UNLV. They came out and just jumped all over UNLV. It's 30-7 at halftime, 23-17 in the first quarter. And then against Syracuse, we saw it take a next step. So it wasn't so much, they didn't clean up their play as, a ton. It's not like they played a perfect game. Still had a lot of mistakes. But they finally played with the speed and the confidence and the physicality that we thought we were going to get from this team coming into the season.
And that's one thing of many that I remember catching from you and the guys when I broke in on one of your podcasts here recently, one of your live streams, I think, just talking about guys finally playing freer in certain positions, especially in the defensive side, some linebackers that finally get it because they hadn't been showing the speed that they have because they're thinking too much and trying to dissect too much, that they haven't been able to instinctively read it and go.
Well, we're watching Syracuse. You hear this thing, Notre Dame doesn't have speed. And I'm like, well, I can understand why you would think that if you're not a team if you're not someone that just watches practice and games and has watched this team every single snap they've played for the last, however many years like I have. I would understand why people who just watch Notre Dame occasionally would think that, because like you said, they don't play loose, they don't play free. Last week we saw, okay, that's why you guys thought Maris Luafau was a good player. That's why they love J.D. Bertrand so much. I mean, Syracuse has one of the best running backs in the country, and on back-to-back snaps, I'm watching Notre Dame's 6'5", 265-pound defensive end open up and run with him on wheel routes, right? Like when their 6'5", 265 DN can run with your all-American caliber running back, what are you supposed to do? Right. And so we finally saw Brandon Joseph look like the kid he was a couple years ago with a couple picks in the game, and you start to say, okay, this is what we thought Notre Dame was going to be. They overwhelmed, coming into the game, it was Syracuse's defensive team speed that people were worried about, right? Because they got a lot of team speed. But in reality, it was Notre Dame's team speed on defense that allowed them to carry the day on that side of the ball. And that's what we thought they were going to be. Now, the offense still hasn't figured it out yet from a skill standpoint, but the defense is finally starting to figure it out because, as you said, less thinking, more reacting, and let's make it be more about our guys versus their guys and not so much about how smart we are compared to how smart the other team's coaches are, because we got better players than they do. Let's let them go play. That's I think the mindset that's Notre Dame staff is starting to take, and I think that's why their play has been better the last couple of weeks.
Folks, if you're not familiar, it's irishbreakdown.com. Get there for the best in Notre Dame football coverage. Brian Driscoll, the reason we have him on is because exactly what you're hearing. He knows what he's talking about, not just concerning Notre Dame, but any opponent, anything across the country. He's a coach and he knows what's going on. He knows football. He knows Notre Dame personnel and history. Absolutely love the discussions here. So let's get to one of the best running backs in the nation from one of the best that you faced last week. Okay, Will Shipley. And I know that you break down film for the high school guys and so forth, but I don't. I have to dive into the recruiting, but it's more about rankings and such. Because my perception of Will Shipley coming out of high school was cute back, in space kind of guy. No, he will beat on you. He's a tough,
Mhm.
tough kid. And how do you think that matchup looks for the Notre Dame defense right now?
Well, Notre Dame wanted Will Shipley bad. His
Yeah.
final two schools were Notre Dame and Clemson, and for a while there, people thought Notre Dame was going to get him. And I think you nailed the misconception of him, and I think there's certain reasons why that perception was there. He's not a bigger back. You know, he was more of a home run threat in high school, but that's just because he was so much better than everybody else he played. I think last year was a struggle for Will Shipley, and I think it was the best thing to ever happen to him. I do, because he had to learn to grind out yards last year. You know, in high school, he was running through big holes and he was just so much faster and more explosive than everybody else. He's never been in a situation where he had to, pound. And if there's only an inch, I got to take that inch, and you look at some of the games he had last year against Georgia Tech and NC State, and even the Florida State game, which was, probably, in my opinion, his best game of the year. He had to learn to be an efficient player. He had to learn to be a physical player in ways that he never had. And I think this year it's made him such a better player because, you're starting to see. Last year you saw the physicality, the running back instincts shine. This year, now that the line is still not great, but certainly better than it was a year ago, now he's able to combine those two things together. You're seeing the home run ability as a kick returner. I mean, he broke the game open against Florida State in the second half, not with a run or a catch, but with a half opening kick return that then set up a touchdown the next play. Next thing you know, because if you go back and look at that game, Florida State ran for, I think it was like 123 yards in the first half against Florida State, maybe 132. They were running on him. But that play and then the touchdown that followed, all of a sudden it's 31-14. You've now taken Florida State out of their game plan. They can't be balanced, and that broke that game open. So you're seeing him still be able to pound out the tough yards, but that experience has made him a much better back, and as the talent around him has been better, I think Will Shipley is one of the better backs. We got asked today, would you take Will Shipley over Notre Dame's trio of backs? No, I wouldn't, because I'll take the 3 over the 1. But if it was a 1-for-1 trade, I think Will Shipley is one of the better backs in the country, and he's not getting enough credit, in my opinion, for the job he's doing as an all-around back, kick returner, pass catcher, runner, and he's improved as a pass blocker this year as well.
Yeah, you allude to last year's Florida State performance. Certainly, he showed to be a man in that game. They could run the 4-minute offense because of him, and he just wore down the Florida State defense. Let's turn to the other component in this Clemson offense. Of course, unique connection between Notre Dame and DJ because, of course, he flashed in his 2 appearances, Boston College and then Notre Dame, in filling in for Trevor Lawrence, and threw up the big 439 game, the largest number of yardage that Notre Dame's ever given up. Then, of course, he just craters last year, 9 TDs and 10 picks, about a 55% completion percentage. But a lot of that, and I watch a lot of Clemson football, the receiving core last year compared to what we're used to at Clemson were complete opposites. Offensive line, pass protection. Are we now getting somewhere in the middle of what DJ really is, do you think?
I think this is more who he is. I
Yeah.
do. He wasn't the guy we saw. I mean, Notre Dame didn't have a lot of film on him. Clemson did a nice job that year of just not giving him a ton to do, let him use his big arm to throw the ball downfield. You had some stuff out of the backfield. I thought it was just one of those games where he was able to hit some big passes. You had a couple catch and runs to Amani Rogers, which allowed him to get some yak after the play. And then he hits a big shots down the field to Cornell Powell. Not only was the receiving core bad, but you had an offensive line that couldn't block anybody. And I felt like for some reason, Tony Elliott was trying to call a game like he still had Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson. You're turning him into a lead runner. That's not DJ's game. He can be a complimentary runner. They're still running him this year, but not like they did last year. They were still trying to run an offense with fast after the catch receivers, but they didn't have fast after the catch receivers on the roster. Like you're trying to have Joseph Ngata and Bo Collins be T. Higgins and Justin Ross, and they're different players. I think this year we've seen them adjust more to the actual talent of the roster, using the tight ends a lot more this year, which has been a big part of it. Davis Allen, and I can never remember how to properly pronounce their backup tight ends
Yes.
name, but they've got like 35 catches for over 400 yards. I think that's added something really down the middle of the field. And then they're using Bo Collins and Joseph Agata more appropriately, letting them be big 6'5" vertical players. Let them win the 50-50 balls. Let them be down the field players. And occasionally throw them a little quick screen to get some chunk yards. But I feel like they've somewhat better adapted to the unique talents of their players, where last year I felt like Tony Elliott was saying, well, this is our offense, and I don't care what your skill set is, this is what we're going to do, and it just wasn't effective. And so I do think this is more of who DJ is. He's never going to be I just don't think he's a natural passer, Mark. I don't think he has a real natural throwing motion. We were kind of discussing today, he's a former star baseball pitcher who threw like mid-90s in high school, and he throws a football like a pitcher. He's got a real long delivery. It's not a real clean. It's not like this. It's a real awkward. He can't really speed his delivery up and still maintain good release point consistency. He's more of a really good athlete that throws really hard and fast than he is a natural quarterback. And so he's always going to have some issues with consistency when you can pressure him or get him out of rhythm and do all those type of things. But if he can sit back in a clean pocket, it's going to be a thing of beauty, because the kid has a phenomenal arm strength. I just don't think he has, I'll say, elite arm strength, not elite arm talent. And I think there's a difference. And that's the thing that's going to always keep DJ, in my opinion, from ever being the guy that people thought he was going to be.
Absolutely. Put him out there in shorts, let him chuck it 65 yards versus, when you start talking about it, we see it on display with the Aaron Rodgers of the world on Sunday with, knowing exactly what type of arc to put on it, trajectory, angles, the whole deal. It's crazy. Yep. What those kind of guys can do.
Here's my thoughts on DJ. I'll say this, Mark. If, let's just say hypothetically, they tell him Cade Klubnik's going to be our starter next year and DJ decides to transfer. The thing I'll tell him is, dude, go to Wisconsin or Iowa. Because that's your wheelhouse. Play action, shots down the field, pro style, sitting deep in the pocket, getting the ball out. You don't have to be this quick spread guy that's throwing RPOs and stuff that you're not really good at. Go to a pro style system like a Wisconsin, like an Iowa, and you're going to be a really good football player, because that's the kind of player he is. He's not a shotgun spread, get the ball out all over the place, throw off platform, speed up your motion, all that kind of stuff. That's not who he is. There's offenses I think DJ could be a much better player. I just think he's a great fit for the Clemson offense. That's just kind of my 2 cents on it.
And in his best interest, I would definitely mention Wisconsin before Iowa, I think.
Well, I feel like, if Iowa had a quarterback that could complete a pass, they wouldn't be that bad, and maybe Charlie Jones still stays there and he's doing well. But yes, you are correct. Wisconsin would be the like in Iowa. How about that? Right.
There you go.
A system where he can be more of a pro style, Michigan back in the day, under Lloyd Carr, that kind of vertical downfield play action off of the run game kind of system is where I think he would thrive.
Brian Driscoll, Irish Breakdown. Get there. Notre Dame taking on Clemson. Let's flip to the other side of the ball. So it sounded like you said something off the top that I'm certainly in the same category of in reviewing this Clemson defense. Shoot, whatever they've got, 5 or 6 NFL players along the defensive front, but they're not a dominant group, or haven't been to date. Certainly, Sam Hartman showed us that. But even beyond that, every game, Florida State almost came back. NC State was probably Clemson's most dominant, complete game start to finish against a quality opponent, and certainly NC State's limited. So where do you think the keys are, Notre Dame, Drew Pine versus this Clemson defense?
You've got to do something on the perimeter. So, if you look at this Clemson front seven, the thing that separates them from some of their past units is they're just not the dominant, just blow up the pass rush kind of team. Now, what I do think is their pass rush is getting better. At least their sack production has certainly improved the last 4 games. But, they're a bunch of power players, right? I mean, Brian Bresee is a power player. Tyler Davis is a power player. Miles Murphy is a power player. They're not those twitchy edge guys. I mean, you got Xavier Thomas can do that. KJ Henry has a little bit of that to him, but they're more of a power. They use them as power, which is why they're so good against the run. Outside of the Florida State game, nobody's run on Clemson this year. And so you kind of chalk that up to a little bit of an anomaly. They're really good in power football. Well, against Notre Dame, that matches up really well with what Notre Dame is. They're not going to be able to bully Clemson the way they bullied Syracuse, where Syracuse has got a 5'11", 255-pound nose guard, a 6'4", 258-pound end, and then a 6'4", 219-pound end. And then their best linebacker, Michael Jones, who I love as a college player, is like 220 pounds. They were a small, quick, undersized line that Notre Dame just bullied. You're not bullying Clemson. So if you're going to have the success you need offensively, you've got to figure out ways to get the ball to the perimeter. You just can't line up in 12 and 13 and run duo and inside zone and counter all day and expect to beat Clemson. You have to be able to find ways to get the ball in the perimeter, whether it's quick passing game, quick runs. I don't know if running left to right with like jet sweeps and stuff like that is what you want to do against Barrett Carter and Trenton Simpson at linebacker. But some stuff where you're quickly getting the ball out, running some RPOs. But at the end of the day, Mark, it's going to be about, can you take some shots and hit some shots downfield? Clemson's coaches aren't stupid. They're going to say, how do you beat Notre Dame? Well, don't let their running backs and Michael Mayer beat you. And so load the box and don't, say, hey, if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to beat us with Drew Pine throwing to Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey and Tobias Merriweather, because I don't think you can beat us that way. I know you can beat us by running the ball down our throat. You're going to have to beat us with something on the perimeter. And so if Notre Dame's going to win, they're going to have to be able to hit some shots down the field, have to be able to scheme up some ways to get some ISOs that work in their favor. And the big thing is, and we were talking about this on our show, Mark, here's a crazy stat for you. Notre Dame's 5-man rotation at safety this year has given up 312 passing yards, according to Pro Football Focus. Clemson's 4-man safety rotation has given up 695 passing yards this year. That's a matchup Notre Dame has to find ways to exploit. And if you look at how Notre Dame's had success this year, it's been some of those matchups. It's up the seams against BYU and North Carolina. It's Tobias Merriweather with a post route from the slot for a touchdown against Stanford. So they're going to have to find some ways to isolate their top receivers and Michael Mayer against the Clemson safeties. If you can do that, maybe hit 4 or 5 shots, that might soften Clemson up enough to where your run game can get going. That sounds easy, but if you've watched Notre Dame's pass offense the last 3 weeks, that's not an easy thing for them to do at this point in time, Mark.
Well, yeah, this was a key point that we talked about before the Ohio State game and throughout the offseason with you, was the wide receiver position, minus Avery Davis. Then the 3 guys that you just mentioned, good players, capable players, but trying to find a number one or a guy that can take the top off the defense. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. So have they shown glimpses, or is there one guy that's standing out a little bit more?
Oh, all year. That's the frustrating thing, Mark. If you and I sat down and I could show you the all-22 film, I would say, but good Lord, if they had a quarterback, this team's scoring 40 a game. I mean, there's guys open deep constantly. They're just not getting the ball. Or they miss. You look at the Marshall game, last play, the second to last play of the second quarter, Braden Lindsey's 7-8 yards behind the defense on what should have been a 75-yard touchdown, and the quarterback just misses them. Fourth quarter, they're up 15-12. It looks like they're going to put the game away. Just run a simple hitch, go, read. If the guy stays up, you run by him. If he bails, you throw a hitch. Guy comes up, Braden Lindsey runs by him. Should be an easy walk-in touchdown. Quarterback throws it into the sidelines. That's been Ohio State. They had 2 deep shots opportunity in the second and third quarter against Ohio State that could have gone for big plays, maybe touchdowns. And on one play, the quarterback overthrows Lorenzo Styles, who had a guy beat by 2-3 steps. And the other one, he never gets time to throw. He gets sacked. I think Tommy Eichenberg sacked him, and he never got that chance. That's been every single game where they've got guys coming open 3-4 times. Against UNLV, there was 2 or 3 plays where guys are just open. They just run by guys. And the quarterback's either off target or he doesn't throw it. So if you were able to watch the non-TV film, you'd say these kids are getting open a lot. They're just not throwing them the football. And that's been the maddening thing about this, because it's the same thing week after week after week, and nothing changes. If that light goes on for Drew Pine and he starts throwing and hitting those shots, then this Notre Dame team has a chance to finish very strong, especially against a secondary at Clemson that's just not nearly as good as the one. I mean, 2018, they had, AJ Terrell, Trayvon Mullen. You had Isaiah Simmons playing some kind of a hybrid safety role. You had, that was a team like that. Those are pros, Kayvon Wallace, and then Tanner Muse, who was a draft pick. And now you look at their talent, and it's like, this is not the same group of dudes. Even back in 2015, Mackenzie Alexander at corner, you had Jaron Kearse, TJ Green, who was the second round pick at safety. They don't have the secondary talent to match the front 7 talent. And Notre Dame's going to have to find a way to exploit it. Will it happen? I don't know. I'm beyond predicting it, Mark, because it's just kind of like you see something happen over and over and you keep predicting this is going to be the week. And then now I look like an idiot because you keep predicting that this is going to be the week. But guys are there. The receiver room isn't the problem a lot of people think it is. End of the day, Mark, they can't throw the ball to themselves. They need somebody to throw it to them.
Brian, another storyline narrative, I should say, more so that I've caught on your podcast with your guys would be not necessarily feeling that this coaching staff's doing a great job all the time in every area. What would be your evaluation after 8 games?
Well, I think my biggest issue is really from a coordinator concerns that I have. And I think the issue is I've said, and I'm sure you've heard me say this, the problem is Notre Dame has 2 coordinators that are more focused on showing everybody else how smart they are, as opposed to being what I think good coordinators are, which is make sure that whatever you're doing, your kids can run and can execute it at an elite level. You keep hearing Coach Freeman talk about, well, we didn't execute. It may sound like coach speak, but if I were to sit down and watch the film with you, you'd be like, wow, this team should, if they could just execute some of the basic stuff, they're at worst 7-1 right now. I mean, it's that frustrating. And so, but part of it is why is that happening week after week after week? Because your players don't have the basics down. Right? They're doing a lot of different things. You're asking them to do this one week. It's a pass-oriented game plan this week. You change things up. Notre Dame's more NFL in how they go about their business than they are college. What Coach Freeman did after the Stanford loss is he sat down, from what I was told, he sat down with his coordinators and said, we need to scale this stuff back. We're putting too much on these kids' plates. They're not playing fast. We're having all these kids on defense regressing from where they were last year. We've got to scale back and find that happy medium between having enough volume to be able to go out and scheme people, but also not so much that our kids aren't playing fast. And since then on defense, we've seen them outside of 2 or 3 plays here and there be much more effective in that regard and play at a pretty high level the last couple of weeks. And I think that was really a key. If they can build on that, then that's going to be the success. But that's been the issue, Mark, is stop trying to show everyone how smart you are X's and O's wise. Start saying, hey, here's what my kids do well. We're going to let them, it's going to be about them. Let them go out and play. And I think that's what you see at Tennessee. That's what you see at a lot of the schools that are kind of up and coming. Tennessee doesn't run a million plays, but what they do really well, and they play confidently. Now, look, Notre Dame doesn't have Hendon Hooker, but who thought Hendon Hooker was Hendon Hooker when he transferred to Tennessee? Nobody did. Couldn't beat out Quincy Patterson at Virginia Tech, and he got beat out by Joe Milton at Tennessee. Now, I think both of those were mistakes by those coaching staffs, but you get my point. It's kind of like Joe Burrow. Nobody thought Joe Burrow was going to be Joe Burrow going into 2019. He wasn't that guy in 2018. But you had a coaching staff that said, we're going to put these kids in position to be successful, and it's going to be more about them than it is about us, and then we're going to be aggressive with it, and we're going to go out and be successful. Notre Dame hasn't done that on offense this year, and now they're just resorting to just our O-line's better than whoever we're playing against, and we're just going to bully you. And that's worked last couple of games, but it's not going to work if you want to beat Clemson and beat USC. You're going to have to protect the O-line with some of that other stuff, and that's the big unknown about if this team is capable of doing that or not.
We got Brian Driscoll here from Irish Breakdown. Please get there because this is the place to be for Notre Dame football talk. irishbreakdown.com. The YouTube is right here as well with Irish Breakdown. Just search it and you will find Brian and the rest of the guys. One other thing I'd like to hit you on, Brian, would be you alluded to the rankings. And not so much who's too high, who's too low, but the process as it pertains to Notre Dame. Because we mentioned all those 5-3, 6-2 teams that Notre Dame would be compared to. Do you see a number of teams within that lower 5 to 10 in the top 25 that Notre Dame probably is either just better than in terms of your coaching evaluation or better than in terms of resume? And then I'll move it to this portion of the question. Do you think once Notre Dame loses more than one game because the committee doesn't really need to deal with them from what really matters in contention for the Final Four, that they may get dismissed? Not that they're not going to get ranked if they finish 9-3, or of course they are, but that they don't want to deal with them and they don't really have to if they don't matter toward the national championship race?
I don't think that. No, because I think what we have seen the committee do big picture is they will use the kind of 10 to 25 to move teams around to fit what they want for who they want to be the top 4, right? Like that's why Texas is 24th in my opinion. That's why LSU's 10th. There's no justification for LSU being 10th other than it gives Bama a big win, right? What other one do you have? I mean, if you look at LSU being 10th, they're number 16 in strength of record. They're 29 in strength of schedule. They're 42nd in game control. Their only win is over an Ole Miss team that has 0 wins over current top 25 teams. So what's the justification? It's to build up Bama, right? Because there's a drop-off there. There are several teams I think Notre Dame could be ranked ahead of. I'm not spending a ton of time on that on my shows because it's like they're 5-3. It doesn't really matter. But UCF is 0-0 against teams in the top 25. I mean, they have no business being in the top 25 right now. Texas at 5-3. Yes, they have 2 good losses, but who are their good wins? They're 0-2 against teams ranked in the top 25. Oregon State's 0-2 against teams ranked in the top 25 at 6-2. Wake Forest 0-2 against teams in the top 25. I made this point in our show last night. Notre Dame has more wins over top 25 teams than Michigan, Ole Miss, Penn State, Illinois, North Carolina, Syracuse, Wake Forest, NC State, Oregon State, Texas, and UCF combined. Because they have 2 wins over top 25 teams, current top 25 teams. But I think what we saw, Notre Dame was left out, in my opinion, because what I saw from the committee last night is they put way more emphasis on who you lost to than who you beat. That was my takeaway from last night. Texas is in there not because they beat anybody, but because they had a good loss to Bama and they lost to Oklahoma State, whereas Notre Dame lost to Marshall and Stanford. And that's somewhat fair, right? I mean, is Notre Dame's good losses or good wins counteracted by bad losses? I think so. So that's why I'm not too upset about it. But, I look at it and I'm saying, how is UCLA behind Ole Miss? How is UCLA behind LSU? When you're talking about a UCLA football team that has a very convincing win over the number 14 team in the country, and their only loss is to the hottest team in college football, not named Tennessee, and Oregon, right? And so there's a lot of, how's TCU behind Alabama? TCU has 2 wins over top 25 teams. Alabama has 1, and that was over the number 24 team who's in TCU's conference, right? And so there was a lot of that, and I felt like it was more about who you lost to than who you beat. And I don't think that's how ranking should be. Ranking should be more first and foremost about who you beat. Then after that, it's like, okay, yeah, you beat this team, but you got this really bad loss. Then I'd be more, welcoming to that argument. But the way that it shaped up last night with LSU being 10 and Ole Miss being 11, it was like, okay, this was a faulty process. But a lot of this stuff is going to shake itself out. If Notre Dame loses to Clemson, doesn't matter if they were in the rankings this past week, right? They're 5-4. We're no longer having Notre Dame in the top 25 conversations. If they beat Clemson, then they'll jump in the top 25 and problem solved, right? Same with LSU. If LSU beats Alabama, then hey, number 10 ranking justified. If they get smacked by Bama, they won't be in the top 10 anymore. So it all shapes itself out, but it was a more, I found more fault in this ranking than I have in a lot of the rankings in the past. And I think part of it is a lot of teams scheduled soft in the non-conference. And that's a big part of this thing for me.
Absolutely. And it's tough to find games. Anytime we have a call-in show and I get all sorts of scenarios thrown at me, or why is this team here and there, try to find the competitive, interesting games that are meaningful out there for most of these teams that play in conferences. They don't exist outside the conference. They're not there.
And that's why I'm willing to give Alabama maybe a little bit of benefit of the doubt compared to some other teams, because they were willing to go play Texas on the road this year. But like when people say, oh, Michigan should be ahead of Clemson, based on what? Right? Michigan has 1 win over a top 25 team. That team is 0-2 against top 25 teams. There's 1 team in college football that has 3 wins over ranked opponents. That's Clemson. So like, well, Michigan's looked better. Well, they should look better. They've played nobody. When you play bad teams, you're going to look better. And, to me, I wish the committee would start doing more to penalize teams that do things like, I don't know, schedule Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn as your non-conference, right? Like, that's my frustration. Like, I'll give LSU a little bit of a pass for their early season loss because they were willing to go schedule Florida State, right? I'm willing to give some of those teams a pass. What I can't stand are these teams that play nobody non-conference, and then you want to lift up your conference schedule as some sort of, oh, look what we did. Hey, Ole Miss, if you want to be ranked higher, don't have a weak non-conference schedule where your best opponents in the non-conference is Georgia Tech. You know, you play Tulsa, Troy, and Central Arkansas. You know, look, Tennessee was willing to go on the road and play Pitt, right? It's a good football game. I think another thing we learned last night is the ACC, the perception of the ACC is built more on what they were in the past and not what they've done this year. If you look at what the ACC did this year out of conference, the ACC deserves a lot more respect than the Big Ten, let's say. Because outside of Notre Dame and Ohio State, what's the win? What's the out-of-conference win that the Big Ten is hanging their hat on? Penn State beating Auburn?
Yeah.
I mean, look, Michigan State went out and got waxed by Washington. Wisconsin lost at home to Washington State, right? Michigan played nobody. I'll give Penn State credit because when they scheduled Auburn,
sure,
you didn't expect Auburn to be bad.
Yeah,
you don't.
The intent's there. Yep.
Right. The intent is there, but they're not good. You know, whereas you look at the ACC and you say, well, you know, the Big 12, let's hype up the Big 12. Well, NC State, who people tell me shouldn't be ranked, they went on the road and they played at hosted the Big 12 team in Texas Tech and smacked them. Right. Well, that Texas Tech team beat Texas. Right. So they have a road win over ECU. That's looking like a pretty good win now because ECU's turned out to be a pretty decent football team at 6-3, you know, with two of their losses being the pretty good football team. So you look at the ACC is done. Duke goes on the road, goes toe-to-toe with Kansas, while Kansas was still good before their quarterback got knocked out.
Yep.
You know, you look at Clemson plays Notre Dame. Syracuse plays Notre Dame. Syracuse also beat Purdue. It's a Big Ten win right there. Duke beat Northwestern. That's a Big Ten win. Northwestern stinks, but it's Duke, right? So I feel like there's also, you know, there's a lot of reputation being put into these rankings, which should not be happening in week 9. I mean, the SEC is what it is based on what we've seen. What has the SEC done out of conference that's blown anybody away? Georgia struggling with Kent State, Tennessee needing overtime to beat a middle-of-the-road ACC team, right? I mean, what's the big win that LSU losing to Florida State? Texas barely beats, or Alabama barely beats Texas. Auburn gets killed by Penn State. What is SEC's reputation built on this year? Texas A&M loses to App State. App State played better against Texas A&M than Alabama did. So that's what, like, to me, it's a lot about reputation, not evaluating who these teams are this year. Pac-12 is another example. Pac-12 is really good this year, and they have the non-conference games to show it, with one exception: Oregon, Georgia. That game is tainted, understandably tainted people's perception of that league, because that's the best team in your league, and they got killed by Georgia. So I understand that one. But I think the ACC is not getting enough respect. And I think, like the Big Ten, for example, Mark, you're a, you know, obviously follow the Big Ten a lot.
Yep.
I don't think the Big Ten is as good as people thought it was going to be this year.
No.
Ohio State's still really good. And I think Michigan's a really good team, but do we really know how good? They haven't played anybody, you know, and at least Ohio State had the intent of going on, you know, playing a team like Notre Dame, who I think at that time, Notre Dame was pretty good. I think the loss to Ohio State sort of put Notre Dame down a path because they put so much into that. But as we've seen last week, Notre Dame's still a pretty talented football team. The intent was there. You know, but Minnesota's not as good as I thought they were going to be. Wisconsin's not as good as I thought they were going to be. Iowa's awful. Michigan State was a preseason top 20 team. They're awful. You know, I think we have to more react to what teams are and stop putting so much on what we think teams are based on past success, because right now the ACC deserves a lot more respect for what they've done on the field out of conference than what a lot of other teams have done on the field out of conference.
Absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better, although I talk about it every day. And I came into this season clearly thinking that the SEC was this was the only time, and I said this a number of times during the offseason, that I had in my mind clearly who number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were. It's usually, you know, I know who number 1 is, but I have no idea number 2. But that didn't turn out to be the case. So I got to put my preseason perception aside, because now we started to play football. And you're right, the Big Ten, we just don't have a good enough sample size, but we have to evaluate the sample size that we do have. And it's not good. It's not good.
Right. And the offenses aren't good. Yeah.
Unfortunately, teams like Michigan, Minnesota, and Maryland didn't go out there and play anyone for us to know
Right.
about them.
Right. Whereas ACC teams did. I mean, you have data points with the Pac-12. You have data, and then some of the things that they did do out of conference in the Big Ten, they didn't go so well.
No.
And that's kind of part of it too. Is so Big 12, I think, they tried, but again, some of the teams in the Big 12, they didn't play anybody. Kansas State's non-conference, they have lost to Tulane, right? So I feel like, the Big Ten, and the Big Ten's interesting too, because I thought the West was going to be better this year. I did. I thought
thought it
Minnesota was
was.
going to bounce back. I thought Wisconsin would be better than they are. I thought Iowa would still be. I mean, I didn't think they were going to be great, but I thought they'd be better than what they are. It's good to see Illinois emerging, but I think that's been a big thing for me. I thought Michigan State was going to fall back, but Mark, I thought like 7-5 fall back, not
exactly
what they've been. And I think that's been an issue. And again, I think Michigan's really good, but again, we're going off the eye test because we don't really have much of a resume to evaluate them on based on who they've played.
Yeah, I knew there were no elites in the Big Ten West, but I thought it was a division full of at least the top four were like top 15 to 40 teams.
Right.
And they're not that. The only condition I'll put on what you said is that Wisconsin, they were in the top 15 when they lost to Washington State. Same thing with Michigan State getting blasted by Washington. Don't even look at the final score. You had to watch the game to see how badly they played it, how they got manhandled. The only thing I'll say about those two is that while they are traditional Big Ten powers and we expect more, they did come back to the conference and get kicked around.
Right.
So the rest of the conference is kicking those two around just like Washington State and Washington did.
Right. Right, I get that. But like you said, though, there's not a ton of data points to be able to point to and say, hey, here's, Nebraska gets blown out by Oklahoma, who then gets blown out by a couple teams in their conference. But again, Nebraska's not the team that you're hanging your hat on. But the point is what else do you have? What other – I mean, Iowa loses to Iowa State. Iowa State's not very good.
No.
And that's kind of the frustration that you have is, West Virginia, Maryland, they play Buffalo, Charlotte, and SMU. Like, okay, and you only beat SMU by a touchdown, and SMU's a middle of the road AAC team. I think Auburn tried. Auburn had intent to play those kind of teams, Central Michigan and Ohio and MAC teams. But, Auburn on the road, you tried. Purdue tried. They went and played Syracuse on the road, got beat. That was a competitive game, but they got beat, so, Northwestern's actually
game.
Right. But, that was a weird game. Like if you'd have watched the first three quarters and then the fourth quarter, it's like it was two different games.
Yeah.
It was very strange, but, like Minnesota, they played New Mexico State, Western Illinois, and Colorado. I guess you can kind of give them credit for scheduling Colorado, but Colorado hasn't been good for like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So that's my thing is you don't have a lot of data, but whose fault is that? Indiana played Cincinnati, got blown out, played Western Kentucky, good win over Western Kentucky, so it's just Rutgers, I guess, is a win over Boston College is a good data point for the Big Ten, but Boston College is, like you said, gone to the ACC and got kicked around in the ACC. Louisville win. Or Big Ten, Northwestern. They're just awful.
Yeah.
So that's the thing is like, you're right. There's not a lot of data points, but Iowa loses to Iowa State and barely beats South Dakota State. It's just there's not a lot there, but a lot of that's intent. You didn't have the intent to try to challenge yourself. It's not that it's like the year that Bama played Florida State and they weren't that good. I give Bama credit. When you scheduled Florida State, they were pretty good. You can't control the fact that they're not good now. Like Auburn, Penn State scheduling Auburn. When was that game scheduled? It was at least 2-3 years ago, right? At least 4 or 5 years ago when they scheduled the home and home. Well, at that time, Auburn was competing for SEC championships. It's not their fault that Auburn's made bad coaching decisions since then, right? There's just not enough of that. Michigan intentionally scheduled what they scheduled, and you shouldn't reward a team like that. You can't. You can't, in my opinion.
Brian Driscoll, Irish Breakdown. All right, Brian, we appreciate the time to break down everything that you do. Enjoy the game.
Thank you.
It should be a good one.
Yeah, I hope that's all I want, right? Just be a good game. Unless if it's not a good game, then hopefully Notre Dame blows them out. At my age, Mark, say, people, I just want my team to win. I'm like, yeah, I want my team to win convincingly because I can't deal with the stress of these close games is starting to get to me, man. There's too many of these close games. I need to blow out one of these days. So that'd be nice.
All right, Brian. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.